Dinosaurs, do they fit in the Bible? This is Jay Wooten. This picture is from the Creation Museum in northern Kentucky, operated by Answers in Genesis. I borrow a good bit of their material along with creation.com and the Institute for Creation Research, ICR.org. The word dinosaur. In 1841, Sir Richard Owen combined the Greek words dinos, meaning horrible or fearful, and sauros, meaning lizard. The result was dinosaur, terrible lizard. Creatures referred to before 1841 would have to be called by a different name. Now, why the word dinosaur? Well, that's because people were digging up and beginning to assemble shockingly large skeletons. They needed a word for this new classification of beings they were finding. Now, let's start with the Bible. Dinosaurs would have been created on day 6 of Creation Week. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. This goes back to the very first chapter of the Bible. Let's also look for dinosaurs in the book of Job, which may date back as far as 2000 BC. In Job 40, beginning verse 15, it says, "Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you." Now, along with you would mean human beings. That's the audience he's writing to. Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are close knit. Its bones are tubes of bronze, its limbs like rods of iron. Does that sound like an elephant? A tail like a cedar? Not quite. That's one of the likely suspects people try to say Behemoth was. Naturally, one of the largest animals we're aware of roaming the earth right now. With a tail, the elephant is pretty puny. Now, some have said what they really meant was the trunk, which is trying to say the Bible doesn't know head from tail, which really doesn't make sense. Now, there's another creature that has been put forth. I think the Amplified Bible actually goes ahead and puts this in there for Behemoth. A hippopotamus. That's not much of a tail either. Now, what animal has a tail that looks like a cedar? A strong possible suggestion: a sauropod dinosaur. This, of course, is a artist rendition of what it would look like. All our pictures of dinosaurs are based on their skeletal remains or portions of their skeletal remains. Its tail sways like a cedar. Now, have people lived alongside dinosaurs? This is a carving in Cambodia. The Angkor is a collection of ruins from the ancient Khmer civilization that lived and ruled in Southeast Asia from the end of the 9th century to the end of the 12th century. These ruins now lie in an area designated as the Angkor Archaeological Park in the Kingdom of Cambodia. Now, that carving looks quite a bit like pictures we've seen of a Stegosaurus. Now, our pictures of Stegosaurus, again, are based on the skeletal remains that have been dug up and reassembled. They weren't doing that back when this was carved. Is it possible they actually saw a Stegosaurus? Moving along several thousand miles to Europe, we're going to look at Bishop Bell's tomb. Bishop Richard Bell died in 1496, and as was the custom at the time, was buried under the floor of the church in Carlisle, England. His tomb was a brass vault set into the stone floor. And what immediately stands out is that there are several engravings of animals carved into the narrow brass that runs at the outer edges of the tomb. Well, among the various pictures of different animals, we see this picture. This looks like two of the same kind of animal interlocked together. Now, again, 1496 was long before they started digging up dinosaurs. And we can see these look a lot like the pictures of dinosaurs we have today. Not photographs, mind you, but drawings based on skeletal remains. And they're engraved right alongside animals they would see every day in Europe. Is it possible they saw these animals? Again, thousands of miles away in the U.S., we see Native American petroglyphs under the Kachina Bridge at Natural Bridges National Monument in Utah, in the U.S. These would have been drawings made by ancient people on cave walls. See, the enhanced picture here looks quite like our other picture, a sauropod dinosaur. Now, a park ranger there would tell you this was a mythical creature, even though it's included alongside pictures of other familiar animals that we know they would have seen at the time. Again, did they see an animal that looked like a dinosaur? Or did they just imagine one that looked like a dinosaur? Back to Europe and Leonardo da Vinci. It's called Da Vinci's Dragon. It's from the Royal Collection, London, England. We'll take a closer look at the picture in a moment. Late in his life, in the 16th century, Leonardo da Vinci sketched a study of the movement of cats, mostly domestic, but also a lion, and also in the middle of the sketch, a dragon. But he also sketched several studies of animal movements, including horses, birds, dogs, cattle, bears, and even a crab, based on detailed observation of the anatomy and or movements of domestic or captive animals. Why would the dragon be the sole exception to this rule? Da Vinci, you remember, was a scientist and an artist. Why would he have a mythical, non-existent creature among all these observed animals? Here's a closer look at Da Vinci's picture. We see in the middle the dragon amidst various cats and other animals. Now we can see the resemblance to dinosaurs as artists have imagined them based on skeletal remains. There are lots of legends of dragons in Europe, but did they actually exist? Did they actually see them? Were they large, great reptiles of the same variety as the skeletons we dig up? Back in the Far East, a Chinese English dictionary published in China in 1979, under the definition of dragon, definition 3 said a huge extinct reptile, a dinosaur. The Chinese, when hearing about dinosaurs, recognized them as dragons, equated dragons and dinosaurs in their text. Now, to the right, the traditional complex way of writing dragon, the Chinese people see the right part as reflecting the spiny back and tail of the dragon. The word Konglong, the Chinese word for dragon, literally means, the Chinese word for dinosaur literally means fearsome dragon. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing Konglong, as it has two different marks above the O's, yet I pronounce them exactly the same way. but the Chinese word for dinosaur means fearsome dragon. They recognize the two as one and the same. And of course, the Chinese have a long history of dragons in their literature and their storytelling. Dragons are often connecting to still living animals. In these idioms, we will see dragons and tigers connected repeatedly. The phrase crouching tiger, hidden dragon means a benign-looking place with powerful hidden forces. Dragon's pool and tiger's den means a dangerous place. Dragons rising and tigers leaping means a scene of bustling activity. Why would a mythical creature be included alongside a known, observed creature again and again? Now look at the Chinese calendar. Look carefully around the circle. Every year is a different animal that cycles every 12 years. Among all these well-known, well-observed animals still existing today, there is the dragon. Now, why would a mythological creature take its place among 11 other well-known animals if they did not once actually see dragons? They didn't actually know dragons, that they were part of life in China. Now let's look at the secular science timeline on dragons and humans. Dragons are said to have died out at least 65 million years ago. Human ancestors go back no more than 7 million years. Using tools goes back 2.5 million years. Modern humans developed about 200,000 years ago. So there's no overlap between humans and dragons according to the secular timeline. Now, why is this important? I'm speaking here to Christians and those trying to reconcile the Bible and the secular timeline. Back in 2007, there was a debate on the primetime television show 2020. Christians Kirk Cameron and Ray Comfort debated two atheists. It was kind of a big deal at the time. Now, do you know what the first question from the audience was? Where does cancer come from? I remember the woman who asked it was very, she seemed to be quite a bit in pain. It's a painful question for her to ask. In pain and anger, too. Where does cancer come from? She had obviously been hurt by cancer in some way, her own or more likely a loved one. Now, the biblical answer to where cancer comes from is the fall, the curse of sin brought on by humanity's rebellion against their Creator. We see this in Genesis 3 and 4. All sin, hatred, war, famine, disease, and natural disaster would follow. In Genesis 4, we see the murder of Abel by Cain. It shows the curse of sin is carried on to the next generation. The problem here is that if you accept the secular timeline, you cannot use the fall to answer the question, where does cancer come from? Why not? Well, there's evidence of cancer, tumors, and arthritis in the fossil record in dinosaurs. According to the secular timeline, this would be millions of years before humans existed. Lots and lots of animal death before sin. Cancer before sin. A lot of suffering and pain before sin. Now back to the Bible, Genesis chapter 1 again. God saw all that He had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Now, could cancer be part of God's very good creation before sin? Death, tumors, arthritis, animals killing each other, was that part of God's very good creation? Continuing in the Bible, let's see what makes sense here. Paul says the last enemy to be destroyed is death. Could the enemy, death, be part of God's very good creation? That would have to be if there was death, even by animals, before the fall. Because that would make death of animals part of God's very good creation. Cancer, part of God's very good creation. There are those that try to warp the Bible to fit the secular timeline. This cartoon by Dan Lath of Answers in Genesis illustrates that well. I met Dan once. He was a very nice guy. See this picture of the Garden of Eden. Oh, Adam, this is such a perfect world. Yes, Eve, it's very good, just like God said. But it's a garden sitting on layers and layers of millions, even billions, of dead bones. The fossils of animals who have died of natural causes and calamities and disasters, animals that have killed each other. Could all that have been part of God's very good creation? Does that make any sense at all? Reconciliation. Paul tells us, for since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead also comes through a man. Paul is reaffirming his plain reading, plain understanding of the book of Genesis as true history. Death came through a man, Adam, when he sinned against God. When he and Eve, the entire human race at the time, rebelled against God. The resurrection of the dead, life out of death, also comes through a man. That would be Jesus Christ, the Son of God, Emmanuel, God with us, came down to this earth to pay for our sins. On the cross, he took the punishment we deserve. But if we can recognize our sin on that cross and call out to him for salvation, we will be reconciled to God forever. And death will not be our eternity, but an eternity of life with our Savior, Jesus Christ, who is the source of life. If you want to know more about this, I ask you to check out my book, Breakaway Kingdom, Why Does Our World Look Like a War Zone, by Jay Wooten, available on Amazon. Now, which timeline makes more sense? The secular timeline or the biblical timeline? Now, soft tissue has repeatedly been found within dinosaur bone fossils. This happened first by accident when one was broken and they looked inside. But since then, soft tissue has been found within fossil after fossil, pretty much everywhere they look. Why is this a problem? Soft tissue cannot last. One of the substances found is collagen. It's a tough, ropey protein found throughout bones. Under absolutely ideal conditions, calculations indicate it could last at most several 100,000 years. Not 1,000,000 years, not 65 million years. Mitochondrial DNA in bones could last no more than 650,000 years before it totally disintegrated. A fraction of how long the bones are said to be. Scientific calculations based on minimum observed decay rates come up with these numbers. In other words, the perfect conditions for them to last as long as possible. And the calculations don't even come close to 65 million years. But if you start with the Bible, science works just fine. Nothing we find in the world invalidates the Bible. Nothing conflicts with the Bible's timeline, the Bible's historical narrative. Now, some scientific conclusions about what we find may contradict the Bible, but those, in addition to being based on observed fact, are also based on assumptions. But we'll talk about that more in another video. Now, the Apostle Paul says of God, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." The key here for our purposes is, since the beginning of creation, these things have clearly been seen, being understood. Now, for something to be seen and understood, the only creature on earth that can do that is humanity. Since the creation of the world, these things have been seen and understood by people. That means they must have been around from the beginning of creation. So Paul clearly understands the Bible plainly. We find out Jesus does too. Let's let him have the last words. Mark 10:6. But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Jesus is quoting from the first chapters of the Bible, quoting them as true, literal history. And he says, at the beginning, God made them male and female, not millions or billions of years after creation. In the secular timeline, different sexes don't come around till much later after life has begun. I saw a television show, I believe a British show one time. A couple of atheists were talking and laughing, saying, if mankind is the pinnacle of God's creation, why did it take him 14 billion years to get around to him? That is mocking the Bible against the secular timeline. Now, that doesn't make the secular timeline false, but it shows its incompatibility with the Bible. But we see here the Bible timeline is hardly unreasonable. It may very well make more sense. And Jesus seems to clearly believe it. And that authority is good enough for me. Jesus called Abel, the son of Adam and Eve, the first prophet. Therefore, this generation will be held responsible for the blood of all the prophets that has been shed since the beginning of the world. Prophets, people, Abel the first, since the beginning of the world. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who was killed between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, this generation will be held responsible for it all. Jesus clearly believed that people were there right around the beginning of the world. A harsh conflict with secular science. Here's some additional resources that may help you. From creation.com, from the Creation Answers book, a couple of chapters directly related to what we've been talking about. You'll see some of the same information and even some of the same pictures probably. Feel free to screenshot this. And thank you for listening.